Hello again, everyone. This is another video. Professor Champy here. I want to talk today about M. Butterfly once again. I want to focus on Acts 2 and 3 today. Go back and watch my video on Act 1 if you haven't done so yet. And let's get into the play. So, first, I want to talk just a little bit about the plot, get things straight, and then we'll get into some more of the analysis. So, when Act 2 starts, Song and Gallimard are now having an affair. Gallimard starts doing better at work. He gets a promotion. His boss starts taking him more seriously. Things seem to be going well for him. And then I think in scene 4 of Act 2, it's finally revealed that Song is in fact a man who is working for the Chinese government and basically working as a spy and trying to get information from Gallimard that Song can then give back to the Chinese government. And Song is kind of being forced to doing this. They don't really want to, but yeah, Song is revealed to be both a man and a spy, who's kind of betraying Gallimard and playing him for a fool this entire time. So from there, we kind of see Gallimard's fortunes tip a little bit. I'll talk about this in a little bit, but he gives a lot of advice about war in Asia and Vietnam specifically, and none of his predictions come true. So he kind of falls out of favor. He's eventually sent back to France. I think a little bit before that, actually, when things are still going well for him, Song finds it necessary to convince Gallimard that Song is now pregnant, and eventually Song even acquires a baby that Song says, is their child that they had together to kind of bind Gallimard to him even more. So then, Gallimard sent back to France because he's wrong about everything and basically terrible at his job. And eventually, Song is able to follow him back to France, and they live for something like 20 years. I think Gallimard eventually divorces his wife, and he's just living with Song and this kid full time for a really long period of time. And then eventually, as we go on towards the end of the play, he is found out by the French government, arrested as a spy, put on trial, and eventually put in jail. And then that's where how he gets to the scene in the prison cell where he's kind of been narrating everything from, all the flashbacks and everything like that. So that's really the main plot of it. Oh, and then of course at the end we do have Gallimard's suicide. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of the plot. So let's get into a little more of the analysis. I think the first question that comes to mind is simply how did Gallimard not know? If he was with Song, for over 20 years, if they clearly had a sexual relationship, how does Gallimard not know that Song is in fact a man? I would ask you at this point, if you haven't done so yet, to go back to the discussion thread I had from last week, and give me your thoughts to that question, and I'll try to give you a response or something. But this is normally a question I would pose to the class. So just right off the bat for me, how does he not realize? I think it has to come back to the stereotypes, right? Just that Gallimard is so committed to these stereotypes that because Song intentionally, I think, fits into these stereotypes, and it reminds me of the line of dialogue that I flagged right at the end of line 1 where Song says, my fragile heart beats too quickly and gives me away, and she kind of talks about being small and weak and scared and all these things, that basically Song is there playing the part of the stereotypical woman, and the stereotypes, like I think I said before, a lot of these stereotypes about women are transferred to stereotypes about the East or Asia, and because Song intentionally fits into those stereotypes, Gallimard really can't perceive Song as being anything other than that. It's like, if someone is, delicate, weak, small, whatever, all those things, they have to be a woman. How could it be otherwise? It's kind of just that Gallimard is totally all in on the stereotypes at this point. And I think part of it has to do with the kind of grotesque feelings of power that he gets at the end of Act 1 when he feels for the first time in his life that he's fitting into the masculine stereotypes where he talks about the power of a man and all this really horrifying stuff, right? It goes without saying, I feel like maybe I haven't said this enough, that all these stereotypes are, of course, bullshit, right? And harmful and bad in so many ways. And I think that's kind of what the play is about, is showing us how and why these stereotypes are so bad. But I think that has to be at least part of the answer. That Gallimard's so committed to the general stereotypes and the more specific stereotypes of the play Madame Butterfly. We talked about that already. How he needs to see what's happening to him in the context of Madame Butterfly, even though Song is Japanese. Song is Chinese and not Japanese. Like in Madame Butterfly, he's French, not American. Like Pinkerton is American. So he's so determined now to see everything through the lens of these stereotypes that it really cannot be otherwise. So that's maybe one explanation that we can give. I'm open to other ones. I think there are other ones. So I want to hear your thoughts as well. And it's weird, and like I don't know how much we can blame Gallimard because he's constantly rewarded for believing in these stereotypes, right? When he commits to the stereotype of being, like a shitty man, masculine, manly man, whatever. He's rewarded, I don't know, I guess in his own imagination, but he's affirmed by Mark, right? Mark jokes with him and is like, oh, wow, look at you, buddy, and all this kind of stuff. And his boss, Toulon, promotes him. Like I said, he gets promoted basically for embracing the stereotype and playing the part of the aggressive manly man. So he's really just confirmed of these things from all around him. And we have to think that over this long time period, eventually he just fully sinks into it. He completely submerges into the belief in these stereotypes in defiance of the reality in front of him. I think a really interesting connection that the play makes, and one that adds to its critique of stereotypes and how it explains, the severity of, how stupid and bad they are. I'm looking here at page 37. This is scene 3 in Act 2. So it says here, Toulon, Gallimard's boss, says to him, "So, Gallimard, you've got the inside knowledge. What do the Chinese think?" Deep down, they miss the old days. Cappuccinos, men in tuxedos. "So what do we tell the Americans about Vietnam?" "Tell them there's a natural affinity between the West and the Orient." "And that you speak from experience?" "The Orientals are people too. They want the good things we can give them. If the Americans demonstrate the will to win, the Vietnamese will welcome them into a mutually beneficial union. I don't see how the Vietnamese can stand up to American firepower. Orientals will always submit to a greater force." So we see here Gallimard relying on these, again, just awful, fucked up stereotypes. And like I've been saying, it's all the stereotypes that are originally in the play that are associated with women. He associates them also with the East, broadly defined, to the point he believes in them so much it's to the point where he's making military recommendations based on these stereotypes. So it's not just that he believes in them and that maybe he says hurtful things, right? If we're thinking about what the consequences of stereotypes are, it's not just like saying bad things or making people feel bad or whatever. It's literally life and death here, right? It's literally down to military advice. That one of the reasons that the play gives for the Americans invading Vietnam and causing the deaths of hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people, who knows, in American troops and in civilians living in Vietnam. And the play suggests that one of the reasons is this stereotypical belief about what the East is. And that if you just go in there and you're aggressive and you play the part of the man, they'll just fall right into place. They'll submit. Why? Well, that's just how they are. They're naturally submissive, right? And of course, it's bullshit, but it's extremely dangerous bullshit to the point where we see military advice being given on it. So I think that really just adds to what the stakes of this are. Again, it's not hurting people's feelings. It's not only that. It's life or death. Are we going to bomb this country? What kind of military decisions about our empire are we going to make? And honestly, I think if we think about this in real life, we can kind of see how this happened. Um, I know a lot of us might have been young, but if you think back to the time around surrounding 9/11 and the war in Iraq, it was the same thing where a lot of stereotypes were used to justify things that were done. All these people are terrorists, right? So it's okay to go in there and bomb the shit out of them, whatever, kill again hundreds of thousands, millions of people, maybe. So I think we can see how stereotypes are kind of integral to any war, especially wars of colonialism, wars that take place far away from, the like a war not taking place in America, taking place elsewhere. It's kind of really important for the war effort that they convince you of these stereotypes about the other people. Why? Because I think we can see, and I think we talked about this a little bit in our discussions, that all stereotypes are kind of inherently dehumanizing, right? Because it allows you to say, I know exactly what they're like. All of these people are like this. And I said people because I think the whole point is to make them not really people. If you can fit someone into the box of a stereotype, you kind of cut out all the things that make them human, you know, the ability to grow or change or evolve or learn or be different or just be adaptable. Believing in these stereotypes really gets rid of all of that, dehumanizes the people that you're talking about, and then makes it easier to justify going in there and killing a bunch of them. So I just thought this was a really crazy moment from the play that kind of shows us how harmful stereotypes really are. And we, of course, we know, from our point of view, reading this, we know how the war in Vietnam went. We know that it was a huge disaster for America, and that all the wars in that part of the world, that Indochina, were terrible for all Europeans. That none of them were accepted. That the quote Orientals won't submit to the stronger will the way that Gallimard predicts. Gallimard's wrong about everything. All the military advice that he bases on stereotypes is total bullshit. Everything that he thinks about song based on stereotypes, wrong about. Really, this story is a lot about Gallimard kind of falling head over heels for not for song but for these stereotypes, and then being horribly wrong about all of it, and then having to deal with the consequences of that, ultimately his own death. So if we're thinking about our papers and what the messages are about stereotypes, I think all of that kind of comes into play. Another part of the play that I think is revealing about the message that the play is trying to send about stereotypes has to do with Gallimard's relationship with this other woman, Renee. So first of all, I think the kind of a weird thing with this is that so his name Gallimard, right? His first name is Renee, Renee Gallimard, right? He's French. So he meets this woman who's also named Renee, and I think we can see like there's a lot of stuff with this play, the kind of like crossing of genders and stuff like that. Obviously, we'll look at the ending where Gallimard, now he's the one wearing a kimono and everything like that. So there's something going on here with them having the same name that could probably be unpacked more. But what I'm interested in here in terms of stereotypes has to do with why Gallimard doesn't really like Renee and why he stopped seeing her. Um, Even though, he says that, he finds her young and attractive and all this stuff. So I'm interested in what he doesn't like about her and why he kind of cuts things off there. So I'm looking here at page 43. So this is after, I guess, the first time he has an affair with her. And then we get some dialogue here in the middle of 43. Renee, you have a nice weenie. What? Penis. You have a nice penis. Oh, well, thank you. That's very... What? Can't take a compliment? No, it's very reassuring. But most girls don't come out and say it, huh? And also, what did you call it? Oh, most girls don't call it a weenie, huh? It sounds very small, I know. And they go on. And then going on to the next page, Renee gives us her theory about how all war has to do with men not knowing who has the biggest penis. Interesting theory there. And then going on a little further on page 44, Gallimard tells the audience this was simply not acceptable. So I think that's the interesting line. Why does Gallimard say this was not acceptable? What about this particularly is not acceptable to him? And I would pose the question to you to have your own answer to. But I think we can see that his big problem with Renee and why he finds her behavior unacceptable is because she doesn't fit into the stereotype, right? She, physically maybe he talks about how beautiful she is and everything, but she doesn't act small, delicate, submissive. All the things that he's been associating with these stereotypes, all the things that he associates with Butterfly in the Puccini opera, all the things that Song has intentionally, been pretending to be. Renee is not any of these things. It doesn't have any reason to pretend to be. So Gallimard is kind of shocked that she will just talk about a penis, and that she is in their conversation maybe more aggressive than he is, and even the way that they meet, she's as much of kind of seeks him out as he seeks her out. So I think we can see that the real thing that Gallimard is uncomfortable with when it comes to her is that she doesn't fit the stereotype. She's not the small, delicate, fragile woman that he thinks that women are supposed to be like, right? So it doesn't fit in to the whole kind of fantasy that he's been trying to live out this whole time, and he can't deal with it. And he doesn't want to deal with it, and he needs to be away from it. So I think that's just another interesting example of how thoroughly these stereotypes have kind of become the lens through which Gallimard sees the world. So one of the craziest parts of the play and a big turning point comes when Song finally strips naked um, and forces Gallimard to accept that he is in fact a man. That the whole thing has been just kind of a ridiculous lie that Song was forced to do in order to keep the government off of his back. And this initiates kind of a big change with Gallimard. He goes from being very much under the spell of believing Song to be Butterfly, even in the face of clear evidence, obvious evidence, um, and it's kind of like the spell's broken, and Song seems disappointed, right? It seems like Song maybe was just hoping that Gallimard would accept that he's been in love with a man this whole time, and that maybe they could continue to be in love or something like that. But Gallimard, that's not how it is for him. Once the fantasy, the stereotypes are no longer lined up, there's nothing for him in their relationship. There's nothing that he's interested in about Song. And then that kind of leads us into the last scene of the play. Instead of Song's revelation, kind of snapping Gallimard back to reality, and possibly even leading him to a better life, where he can just accept that he's been in love with a man, um, he kind of doubles down, goes even further into the stereotype, and that's kind of how we get to the place where he's committing suicide. Basically, rather than accepting that all these stereotypes have always been bullshit and that these are just lies perpetuated by society that are extremely harmful and cause many, many problems, instead of coming to that realization, Gallimard thinks, well, if I Gallimard don't fit into the stereotype that was masculinity represented by Pinkerton and Madame Butterfly, if I'm not that stereotype, well then I must be the other stereotype, Butterfly. This stereotypical version of femininity. So that's kind of where he has to go with this. I'm looking here at the middle of page 68. Gallimard says, "My mistakes were simple and absolute. The man I loved was a cad, a bounder. He deserved nothing but a kick in the behind, and instead I gave him all my love." And we can see here the language from the beginning of the play, the language from when he's talking about from when he's talking about Madame Butterfly, the description of Pinkerton as the cad, right? The manly man, womanizer kind of figure, and that in actuality that was never Gallimard, and maybe it was Mark, but really it's Song. That Song fits into that more than anything. That Song has, maybe not because he wants to, maybe because he's being forced to by Comrade Chin and the government of China, but Song takes advantage of Gallimard. Song tricks Gallimard, takes financial advantage of him, obviously gets Gallimard to fall in love with him, to give him all the military secrets. And what does Song really give Gallimard in advance, in exchange? Um, Fit into the stereotypes basically to play the part, I suppose. I guess sex. So what we see here is kind of Song being more the role of Pinkerton in Gallimard's mind, right? Because he can only think about things in terms of these stereotypes. So if Song has really been more like Pinkerton this whole time, Gallimard must then be Butterfly. Again, even though Gallimard doesn't fit into being Butterfly in any way, even though he's a man, even though he's from France, all these things, his like this fantasy, the stereotypes, the influence of art, all of it has become so powerful that he has no other option but to now become Butterfly. And that's how we get to the very end of the play, um, where Gallimard says, uh, "It is 1988, and I have found Butterfly at last in a prison on the outskirts of Paris. My name is Rene Gallimard, also known as Madame Butterfly." Turns upstage and plunges the knife into his body as the music blares over the speakers. So then we have Gallimard commit suicide the same way that Butterfly does at the end of Madame Butterfly. So we kind of have just this total like crossing of roles and genders and just inversions of what was supposed to be there. And it's really magnificent. It really is a true achievement, this play, and this ending especially. Just like when we picture all the sounds, all the things happening with the light, it really is fantastic. But above that, what we see is, yes, Gallimard pay for his belief in the stereotypes, for his, for the way that he allowed the things that happen in Madame Butterfly to color his vision of everything. We see him, yes, be punished for it. Um, so, thinking in terms of our essay, what does the play show us about stereotypes? What are the consequences of stereotypes? Um, what is the play trying to do with stereotypes? I think we can see how firmly the play is trying to show the reader, the viewer, that stereotypes are bad, are harmful in many different ways. So for our essays, I would try to be as specific as we can when answering that question. How and why does it show us that the stereotypes are bad, and in what specific ways? I guess the real kind of tragedy of the play is that Gallimard is never able to move outside of these stereotypes. That he can't accept that people, might just be people and everyone's kind of differing. And some people fit into stereotypes and some don't. And that really we'd all be better off if these stereotypes didn't exist, or if we could at least, get rid of them, or all acknowledge that they're bullshit. And even if they have some kind of mental force on us, at least try to hold that back and get some distance from it and say, okay, I know that these expectations have been built up, but they're lies, they're false, and just kind of work with that. And the tragedy is that he can never get out of it. He's stuck within the universe of the stereotypes and the cliches created by Madame Butterfly and stuff like that. So he has no other choice but to end up as Butterfly himself and commit, the kind of ritual suicide to utter the lines that come up a few times in the play. Uh, Death with honor is better than life with dishonor. Um, so that's how he ends up there, where we now have, and then the last image that we get is Song now dressed in a full suit, smoking a cigarette, and butterfly, butterfly, and kind of playing that role of Pinkerton. So it's really kind of a powerful message about how art can shape our perceptions of the world and the dangers of that happening, and how we kind of need to revise these old pieces of art. And if we think of, again, going back to the title of the play, why is it M Butterfly? Um, I think this is right. You can look it up. But I believe in French, Monsieur is the abbreviation is just the M like that. So the real title of the play, most people I've always heard it referred to as M Butterfly, but I think you could also read it as Monsieur Butterfly. Whereas if the old opera by Puccini is Madame Butterfly, this is Monsieur Butterfly. So Huang's kind of whole project here is really to write a correction of Madame Butterfly, right? Madame Butterfly perpetuated all these fucked up stereotypes. It got a lot of people to believe in them, Because think about it, in 1904, when the opera comes out, how many people really knew anything about Japan or China or any of these countries? How many people had been there? How many of them had reliable information on it? All these people were doing was reading these kind of travel books written by Europeans that really everything about Asia that these people would have known was filtered through Europeans. It was filtered through an Italian writing a play. It was filtered through, French people writing travel books, English people, English soldiers and military officers. Everything that they knew about Asia was filtered through the lens of Europe, right? So they could only see uh, Asia or the Orient, they could only see this place in terms of themselves. So really, all that they could do was project a mirror image onto it. So and this allowed them to view themselves as good, right? Because all the positive attributes went to the Europeans of being strong, aggressive, brave, smart, all of those. Whereas the East had to be weak, submissive, emotional, mystical, magical. The West gets like science and logic and all of those things. And then, like we've been saying, it's all the same stereotypes about men and women. So it kind of makes you realize, like, wow, these stereotypes, like, not only are they fucked up and stupid, but like people didn't even try that hard in creating them. given any and even the smallest amount of inspection, it's kind of obvious that all these stereotypes are just houses of cards that fall apart. And that's what happens for Gallimard here. And yeah, the real tragedy is that he can never denounce the stereotypes and say, like, Puccini was a fucking idiot and his play was a bunch of bullshit, you know? He can never say that. He's firmly inground in it, and if Song is gonna be Pinkerton, he must be Butterfly. The play has to end with his suicide. So yeah, it's and again, I'm just in awe of this play. I really am. But the criticism of stereotypes and of what art can do is very strong, very poignant here, and I think it makes a lot of sense. So I think that's kind of all that I have to say about M Butterfly right now. I'm gonna post another video soon talking about that Edward Said essay Orientalism because I think that helps us think even more on that point of how everything about the East was filtered through the lens or the imagination of Europeans. I think he gives us a better way of thinking about that as well. But yeah, I think that's kind of what I have here. So stereotypes really stick out here. And when you're writing these essays, I really would encourage you to be as specific as you can when you're asking the question about stereotypes, because it seems obvious that the play thinks stereotypes are bad, right? So in what ways are the stereotypes bad? Why exactly are they harmful? What specific consequences can they have for us and for society in general? And I think if you're going in that direction, we'll be on the right track. So please send me any questions. I hope you enjoyed the play, and I'll talk to you soon.